I'm Rebecca Wilson, 32, and I thought coming home for New Year's would be like every other year. The familiar scent of my mother's spiced cider, Dad's terrible jokes catching up with cousins. Instead, my brother Michael blocked the doorway, champagne in hand, his smile never reaching his eyes. "This year's only for real family," he said coldly. That's when I remembered I was adopted. After 29 years of belonging, 6 words erased everything. Little did I know this cruel greeting would unearth decades of resentment and set me on a path that would change everything. Before I dive into what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like this video if you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family. Trust me, this story takes some wild turns you won't want to miss. I stood frozen on the porch, the winter air suddenly feeling much colder against my skin. Michael's words echoed in my head as I tried to process what was happening. For nearly 3 decades, I had never felt different from the rest of the Wilsons. Our previous holiday gatherings had always been filled with laughter, warmth, and the chaotic joy that comes with a large, close-knit family. "Michael, stop being ridiculous," I finally managed to say, trying to laugh it off while pushing past him into the foyer. The house was transformed for the celebration as it was every year. Crystal champagne flutes lined the dining room table. Silver and gold decorations adorned every surface, and the scent of my mother's famous hors d'oeuvres filled the air. But something was undeniably different. The atmosphere felt charged, uncomfortable. My cousin Samantha gave me a quick, awkward hug before scurrying away. Uncle David nodded stiffly from across the room, avoiding eye contact. It was as if everyone had received a memo that I hadn't. "Rebecca, sweetheart." My mother Patricia appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Her smile seemed forced, her eyes darting nervously between Michael and me. "We weren't expecting you so early. I texted you yesterday about my arrival time," I replied, confusion growing. "Oh, did you? I must have missed it with all the preparations." She laughed too loudly, touching my arm briefly before turning away. "Richard, Rebecca's here." My father emerged from his study looking startled. He adjusted his glasses and gave me a distracted pat on the shoulder. "Rebecca, good to see you." No warm, bare hug, no affectionate kiss on the forehead, just a formal greeting that might have been offered to a casual acquaintance. While helping Mom in the kitchen, I noticed the formal guest list pinned to the refrigerator. Scanning through the meticulously written names, my stomach dropped. Everyone was there, cousins, aunts, uncles, even distant relatives who usually couldn't make it, everyone except me. My name was conspicuously absent. "Mom, why isn't my name on the guest list?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She fumbled with a serving dish, nearly dropping it. "Oh, that's just a preliminary list. I must have forgotten to add you. You know you're always welcome, dear." But her eyes told a different story. Something had changed. Throughout the evening, I caught fragments of hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when I approached. Aunt Karen whispering to Uncle Jim about the situation, Cousin Rachel giving me pitying glances across the room. Even as I helped set up the appetizers, I felt like an intruder. The home where I had grown up, where my height had been marked on the kitchen doorframe, where I'd celebrated every birthday and milestone, suddenly felt foreign. "What's going on?" I confronted Michael in the hallway, cornering him by the coat closet. "Why is everyone acting so weird?" He took a long sip of his scotch, regarding me coolly. "Nothing's going on. People are just realizing what's important." "Who's important?" "And I'm not important." My voice cracked despite my best efforts. "You're not a Wilson." "Not really." He shrugged as if stating an obvious fact. "Look, you've had a good run. Mom and Dad gave you everything. But things change. I could have left then. Should have, perhaps. But some stubborn part of me refused to be dismissed from my own family. If they wanted me gone, they would have to say it outright. So I stayed nursing a glass of champagne in the corner, watching my family celebrate without me feeling like a ghost in my own home. After an hour of forced smiles and painful small talk, I needed to escape. I slipped away from the party and headed upstairs to my childhood bedroom, seeking refuge in the one place that had always been mine. When I opened the door, another shock awaited me. My room was no longer my room. The lavender walls I had picked out at 16 had been repainted a sterile beige. My bookshelves, once overflowing with novels and academic awards, were now filled with Michael's sports trophies and business books. All traces of my existence had been methodically boxed away, stacked in unlabeled cardboard containers shoved against the far wall. They didn't even wait until I was gone, I whispered to myself, running my fingers over the sealed boxes. As I began opening them, sifting through memories reduced to storage, something caught my eye on the desk, a leather portfolio I recognized as my father's. Curiosity overrode my respect for privacy, especially given the circumstances. Inside were financial documents, and what I found sent ice through my veins. The trust fund my grandparents had established for me, nearly $300, 000, meant for my future security, had been systematically emptied over the past 6 months. Transfer after transfer redirected to an LLC I didn't recognize Wilson Family Holdings. Financial paperwork was familiar territory for me as an accountant. I knew exactly what I was looking at, and the implications were devastating. But what truly made me sick was the last page, a transfer authorization bearing my signature. A signature I had never made. Clutching the documents, I stormed downstairs, no longer caring about making a scene. I found my parents in the kitchen preparing the midnight champagne toast. "What happened to my trust fund?" I demanded, slapping the papers onto the granite countertop. My mother's face drained of color. My father straightened his posture, slipping into what I recognized as his business negotiation stance. "Rebecca," he said evenly, "this isn't the time or place. I think it's exactly the time and place. Why is my trust fund empty? And why is there a forged signature transferring everything to something called Wilson Family Holdings?" "Keep your voice down," my mother hissed, glancing toward the living room where guests mingled. "We can discuss this tomorrow." "No. Now." My father sighed, removing his glasses to clean them methodically. "It's a temporary situation. The money was borrowed for a business opportunity. Michael's company needed capital quickly, and your fund was the most accessible option. Borrowed without asking me. With a forged signature." "It's a family matter," he replied coolly. "The signature was a formality. The money will be returned with interest once the venture succeeds." "What venture?" I pressed. My mother intervened. "Michael's expanding his tech consultancy. It's a wonderful opportunity, but the investors needed him to show substantial capital commitment. We're all helping." "All helping. Or just me, without my knowledge or consent?" A new voice joined the conversation. "Your little fund wouldn't even exist if Mom and Dad hadn't been so generous with you your entire life." Michael stood in the doorway, his expression smug. "Some of us have to build something with our own hands, not just coast on charity." "Charity," I was incredulous. "That money was from Grandma and Grandpa Wilson. They left it specifically for me." "A sentimental mistake," Michael shrugged. "They didn't understand the realities of business. That money is being put to proper use now, building the family legacy. By stealing from me, that's forgery and fraud." "Oh, please," Michael laughed, the sound harsh and unfamiliar. "Don't be so dramatic. No one's stolen anything. You're still benefiting as part of the family." "Am I? Because earlier you made it very clear I'm not part of the real family." An uncomfortable silence fell. My mother busied herself with arranging dessert plates, avoiding my eyes. My father stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. "The timing is unfortunate," he finally said. "We've been meaning to have a discussion with you about your position in the family. As you know, you've always been treated exactly the same as Michael, despite the circumstances of your arrival." "The circumstances of my arrival? You mean my adoption, the one you've referenced exactly twice in my entire life because you said it didn't matter." "And it doesn't," my mother interjected quickly. "We love you, Rebecca. But there are certain realities we must address as you and Michael reach certain stages in life." The family dinner that followed was excruciating. Seated at the end of the table, far from my usual place beside my mother, I picked at my food while conversation flowed around me. When I tried to bring up the forgery again, my father shut me down immediately. "Not at dinner, Rebecca. We have guests. Guests who know what you've done," I challenged. Michael's eyes narrowed. "What we've done, Mom and Dad took you in when no one wanted you. Gave you their name, their home, paid for your education, treated you like their own despite having no obligation to do so. And this is your response, accusations and ingratitude, the moment you're asked to contribute back to the family." The table fell silent, all eyes on me. I realized then that this wasn't a sudden change. This had been building for years, perhaps decades, hidden beneath surface-level affection and holiday gatherings. I was never truly one of them. I had just been useful until I wasn't. The next morning, while most of the family was still asleep after the New Year's celebrations, I drove to Wilson Financial Advisors, our family business. As a CPA myself, though, I had chosen to build my own practice rather than join the family firm. I knew exactly what to look for. The security guard Jerry had known me since I was a child and waved me through without question. The office was empty and quiet on the holiday, giving me free rein to investigate. I logged into the system using the emergency administrator credentials my father had shared years ago, just in case, never imagining I would use them to investigate my own family. Hours passed as I combed through financial statements, corporate minutes, and internal memos. The picture that emerged was far worse than I had imagined. My trust fund was just the tip of the iceberg. A soft knock interrupted my concentration. Sarah, my father's longtime executive assistant, stood in the doorway, her expression concerned. "I thought I might find you here," she said quietly, closing the door behind her. Sarah had always been kind to me, sneaking me candies when I visited the office as a child, and later giving me advice when I started my own accounting career. "Sarah, what's going on? Everything's changed suddenly, and I don't understand why." She glanced nervously at the door. "There are things you should know, Rebecca. Things I've been uncomfortable with for months now, but—" She hesitated. "Your father would terminate me immediately if he knew I was speaking to you." "I won't say a word, I promised." Sarah pulled a flash drive from her pocket. "This contains copies of correspondence and meeting minutes I think you should see. The company is being prepared for sale. Hastings Capital has made an offer." Selling the company, I was stunned. Wilson Financial had been in our family for 3 generations. Does the whole family know? Only your parents and Michael. And the buyers, of course. She hesitated again. "There's something else. Someone requested your adoption records 2 months ago." "My adoption records? Who?" "The request came from your father's email, but Michael was using his computer that day. I remember because your father was at a conference in Chicago." I plugged in the flash drive, scanning the documents quickly. The sale agreement draft highlighted shareholder distributions with only 3 names listed: Richard Wilson, Patricia Wilson, and Michael Wilson. This doesn't make sense. I own 15% of the company. Grandpa Wilson established it in his estate planning. Sarah nodded grimly. "Look at Section 12B. The clause was buried in legal jargon, but its meaning was clear: shareholder rights limited to blood descendants or legally recognized heirs as defined by current company bylaws. The bylaws had been amended 6 weeks earlier. They changed the definition of family heirs to exclude me," I said, the betrayal cutting deeper. "But how the board would need to approve such a change." The board meeting minutes are also on the drive. It was presented as a technical legal update to comply with state regulations. Nobody questioned it closely. I continued searching, finding more disturbing evidence. The family business worth millions was being sold for significantly below market value, with a separate consulting agreement that would pay Michael personally over 5 years, an obvious way to funnel additional compensation while reducing the official sale price that would determine shareholder payouts. Armed with this knowledge, I printed key documents and drove straight back to the house, determined to confront my father. I found him alone in his study, reviewing papers. "You're selling the company," I stated flatly, dropping the evidence on his desk. He didn't even look surprised to see the confidential documents in my hands. "I see Sarah has betrayed my trust. I'll deal with her later." "Don't you dare. She's the only honest person in this entire situation." I pointed to the amended bylaws. "You changed the definition of heir specifically to cut me out." "The buyers insisted on simplifying the shareholder structure," he replied calmly. "It's cleaner this way." "Cleaner? You're erasing me from the family legacy, stealing my inheritance." "It's not stealing when it was never truly yours to begin with, Rebecca." His voice remained even businesslike. "Blood is thicker than water. Surely you understand that basic principle." "What I understand is that you've been lying to me my entire life, telling me I was as much a Wilson as Michael, that being adopted made no difference. We gave you a good life, better than most in your situation could have hoped for. But there are natural limits to such arrangements." He stood straightening his sweater. "I think it would be best if you left now. Take some time to process this maturely." "Maturely? You've stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from me, or about to steal millions more, and you're lecturing me about maturity." "This discussion is over, Rebecca." His tone hardened. "I expect you to vacate the premises by this afternoon. The family needs space to move forward with important business decisions without complications." I stared at the man I had called father my entire life, searching for any sign of the person who had taught me to ride a bike, helped with my math homework, and proudly attended my college graduation. That man was gone if he had ever truly existed. You'll be hearing from my lawyer, I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the storm inside me. Don't make threats you can't follow through on, he replied dismissively. No court will side with you against your own family, particularly when your claim is based on an arrangement that was at its heart an act of charity. As I packed my belongings, the word charity echoed in my mind. Everything I had believed about my life, my family, my identity had been shattered in less than 24 hours. But as the initial shock began to fade, something else took its place: determination. The lakeside hotel felt sterile and impersonal, but it was the only place I could think to go. Sitting on the edge of the bland floral comforter, I allowed myself exactly 10 minutes to cry before opening my laptop. This wasn't just about hurt feelings anymore. This was financial fraud on a massive scale, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica Carter, my best friend since 3rd grade. We had drifted somewhat since college, but had always kept in touch. Heard you're in town. Drinks tonight. I hadn't told anyone about being at the lakeside. News traveled fast in our small community. How did you know I was here? I texted back. Small town. Jerry at the office told Sarah. You looked upset. Sarah called me. What's going on? An hour later, we were tucked into a corner booth at Murphy's Pub, where the dim lighting provided some privacy. Jessica looked the same as always, confident, sharp, and now dressed in the polished style that came with being an associate at Peterson & Walsh, the town's most prestigious law firm. So let me get this straight, she said after I'd spilled the entire story. They emptied. Your trust fund are cutting you out of the family business and effectively disowned you all within the span of a day. That's the condensed version, I confirmed, nursing my gin and tonic. Jessica's expression hardened. This is completely illegal, you know that, right? Forgery, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty. I should introduce you to Daniel. Daniel Hoffman. He joined our firm last year, specializes in family law and inheritance disputes. He's brilliant, and he hates seeing people get screwed over by their own families. 2 days later, I sat across from Daniel in a conference room at Peterson & Walsh. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with intense eyes that missed nothing as I walked him through my evidence. They've been thorough, he admitted, reviewing the amended company bylaws, but not thorough enough. There are multiple angles we can pursue here. Like what I asked, trying not to feel overwhelmed. The trust fund is the most straightforward, that's clear-cut forgery and fraud. The company bylaws amendment is trickier, but potentially vulnerable as well. The crucial question is whether you were given proper notice as a shareholder. He looked up from his notes. But to build a truly solid case, we need more evidence and possibly other witnesses. Sarah might help, I suggested. She's the one who gave me the internal documents. Good, but we'll need more. Are there other adopted members in the Wilson family who might have experienced similar treatment? I thought for a moment. My cousin Thomas. He's Uncle David's son, adopted as a baby. We were never particularly close, but reach out to him, Daniel advised. And let's keep building our evidence. The more documentation we have, the stronger our position. That evening, I called Thomas, who was surprisingly receptive. He'd been excluded from family business matters for years, though in a less dramatic fashion than my sudden excommunication. I always got smaller gifts at Christmas, he admitted. Less money for college, fewer opportunities in the family business. I just thought Uncle Richard played favorites with his own kids. It's systematic, I realized. They've been discriminating against the adopted family members all along, just more subtly until now. Over the next week, Sarah continued providing internal documents, risking her job to help me. Thomas introduced me to 2 other distant Wilson relatives, also adopted, who had similar stories of subtle exclusion. Jessica helped me organize everything into a coherent legal narrative, while Daniel began preparing the groundwork for a lawsuit. One night alone in my hotel room, surrounded by documents and takeout containers, the full weight of what was happening hit me. My family, the people I had loved and trusted implicitly for 32 years, had been systematically planning to erase me from their lives. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I curled into a ball on the bed and sobbed until my throat was raw. Jessica found me like that when she came to drop off more files. Wordlessly, she sat beside me, her hand on my shoulder. I don't even know who I am anymore, I confessed. If I'm not Rebecca Wilson, then who am I? You're the same person you've always been, she said firmly. Smart, determined, kind. Those things aren't determined by who raised you or what last name you have. Her words helped, but the void remained. My entire identity had been built around being a Wilson. Now that foundation was crumbling, and I wasn't sure what would be left when the dust settled. But I knew one thing for certain: I wouldn't let them win. Not just for myself, but for Thomas and the others who had been marginalized because of something as arbitrary as the circumstances of their birth. "We're gonna fight," I told Jessica, wiping my eyes. "And we're gonna win." Daniel helped me understand my legal standing. Jessica provided emotional support, Thomas shared his own experiences, and Sarah continued to be my eyes inside the company. Slowly, we built a case that even the most biased judge would have to take seriously. But none of us anticipated just how dirty the Wilsons would play to protect their money and reputation. I woke to my phone buzzing incessantly. 17 missed calls, 32 text messages, and countless social media notifications. Still groggy, I opened the first message from a college friend I hadn't spoken to in years. "Is everything okay? Just saw Michael's post. Call me if you need to talk." My stomach clenched as I quickly opened Facebook. Michael had tagged me in a lengthy post that had already garnered hundreds of comments. "It pains our family to address this publicly, but Rebecca's recent actions have left us no choice. After years of generous support and inclusion in our family, she has responded by attempting to steal from the very people who gave her everything. While we understand the emotional challenges, adoption can create exploitation and ingratitude, cross a line that cannot be ignored." The post continued painting me as mentally unstable, perpetually jealous of Michael as the real child, and now attempting to extort the family through legal threats. He included carefully selected childhood photos showing him and our parents with me cropped out or standing awkwardly apart, images I had never even seen before. Comments poured in from extended family, childhood friends, and community members. Always thought something was off about her. "The Wilsons are such a generous family. How could she do this? Some people just can't accept their place and be grateful." My hands shook as I scrolled through post after post. Aunts and uncles I had exchanged Christmas gifts with for decades were publicly denouncing me. Cousins were sharing Michael's post with their own condemnations added. Even former classmates were weighing and recalling warning signs that had never existed. My phone rang a client I had worked with for 3 years. "Rebecca, I need to address something uncomfortable," she began without preamble. "These rumors about you attempting to defraud your family. We pride ourselves on working with accountants of the highest ethical standards." "None of it's true," I assured her, trying to keep my voice steady. "My family is attempting to cut me out of my rightful inheritance because I'm adopted. I have documentation." "I think we should pause our working relationship until this situation is resolved," she interrupted. "I'll be transferring our accounts temporarily to another firm." By noon, 3 more clients had called with similar messages. My professional reputation, built carefully over years of honest work, was collapsing in real time. The small accounting practice I had built from scratch was hemorrhaging clients by the hour. I called Daniel in a panic. "They're destroying me," I told him. "Professionally, personally, completely." "This is actually good news," he said, surprising me. "Good news, how?" "It's a clear demonstration of malice and coordinated defamation. Document everything: screenshots, messages, client calls. Every bit strengthens our case." But preserving evidence for a future legal victory was cold comfort as I watched my life unravel. Then things got worse. My email account sent out a message to all my contacts, clients, colleagues, friends with fabricated financial records, suggesting I had embezzled from my own business. I hadn't sent it. They've hacked my accounts, I realized, frantically changing passwords and setting up 2-factor authentication. Jessica helped me trace the intrusion to my laptop, which had been in my old bedroom the night of the New Year's party. Michael, with his tech background, would have had ample opportunity to install spyware. The attack extended beyond social media and email. Doctored photos appeared showing me in compromising positions, my face expertly photoshopped onto other bodies. Text conversations I had supposedly had with various people were screenshot and shared, showing me admitting to the very things I was being accused of. "How are they doing this?" I asked Daniel during an emergency meeting in his office. "Unfortunately, it's not that difficult with the right technical skills, which your brother clearly has," he explained. "They're betting that you'll be so overwhelmed by the public shaming and professional damage that you'll drop the legal challenge just to make it stop." "It's working," I admitted. "I can barely function. Every time I check my phone, there's some new horror." "Then stop checking," Jessica suggested. "Go completely dark for a while. Let us handle communications. But my business is already damaged, she said gently. Taking a week off to regroup won't make it worse and might help you regain perspective. She was right. I needed to step back from the barrage and focus on the bigger picture. Daniel arranged for me to stay at his family's cabin outside town, no internet, limited cell service, and crucially, an address unknown to the Wilsons. The isolation was exactly what I needed. Away from the constant attacks, I could think clearly again. I spent days reviewing everything that had happened, identifying patterns in the family's behavior that I had missed or excused over the years. The slightly smaller inheritance from Grandma Wilson, the jokes about not having the Wilson stubborn streak in my blood. The way family business discussions would sometimes shift when I entered the room. I had been blind to it, all desperate to believe I was truly accepted. Now, with painful clarity, I saw the truth. I had always been conditional family, tolerated as long as I didn't ask for equal treatment, included as long as I didn't demand my fair share. On my third day at the cabin, someone knocked on the door. Hand trembling, I grabbed a kitchen knife before approaching the door. "Who is it?" I called. "Rebecca, it's me," Jessica's voice came through. "I'm alone, I promise." I opened the door cautiously. Jessica stood on the porch holding a manila envelope and looking grim. "What's happened?" I asked. "Someone broke into your hotel room," she said, stepping inside. "They took your laptop, all the paper documents, even your backup drive." My knees weakened. "Everything, all our evidence." "Not everything." She tapped the envelope. "Daniel and I made copies of the crucial documents. But there's more. The judge assigned to review our initial filing is Martin Caldwell." Why does that name sound familiar? Because he's been a guest at Wilson family events for years. His daughter interned at your family's firm 2 summers ago. The system was rigged against me from the start. Even with clear evidence, an impartial hearing seemed impossible in a town where the Wilson name opened doors and influenced decisions. "So we've lost," I concluded, sinking into a chair. Jessica sat across from me, her expression determined. "No, we adapt. This was always going to be an uphill battle. The fact that they're fighting so dirty proves they're scared. Of what they have, all the power, all the connections. They're scared because your claim is legitimate. If it weren't, they could simply let the legal process play out and win cleanly." She leaned forward. "Rebecca, the more desperate their tactics, the more it confirms you're right." Her logic was sound, but the path forward seemed increasingly impossible. The family had money, influence, and a willingness to destroy me completely. What did I have left to fight with? I need to think, I told her. After Jessica left, I sat on the cabin's porch, watching the sun set over the lake. For the first time since this ordeal began, I allowed myself to consider giving up. To walk away from the Wilson name and money completely. Start over somewhere new, perhaps under a different name. As darkness fell, my phone lit up with a notification despite the poor reception an email had come through. The sender address was unfamiliar truthseeker at protonmail.com. The message was brief. "Not everyone in the family agrees with what's happening. Meet tomorrow. Public place. Noon. Central Park bench by the duck pond. Come alone." A trap, possibly. But at this point I had little left to lose. Despite Jessica and Daniel's concerns about the mysterious email, I decided to meet this potential ally. I arrived at the duck pond 30 minutes early, scanning for anyone who might be watching or following me. The park was quiet on the winter weekday, just a few mothers with strollers and elderly people feeding birds. At precisely noon, an elegant elderly woman in a camel coat approached and sat beside me. I recognized her immediately, Grandmother Eleanor Wilson, my grandfather's second wife, who had largely withdrawn from family events after his death 10 years ago. "You look surprised to see me," she said, her voice, still carrying the slight southern accent I remembered from childhood Thanksgivings. "I am," I admitted. "I thought everyone in the family had turned against me." "Not everyone," she replied, her gloved hands folded neatly in her lap. "Some of us still remember what family truly means." Eleanor explained that she had been quietly observing the family's treatment of adopted members for years, documenting the pattern of discrimination. As the widow of Thomas Wilson Sr., the company founder, she still held significant shares in the business and had access to records going back decades. "Your grandfather would be ashamed of what's happening," she told me. "He believed family was defined by love and commitment, not blood." "Then why didn't you say something before now?" I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. "I've been fighting my own battle," she said sadly. "Richard and Patricia have been trying to declare me mentally incompetent for the past 3 years to gain control of my shares." I've had to be strategic. Eleanor opened her handbag and removed a USB drive. This contains historical records showing how adopted family members have been systematically discriminated against in trust distributions, employment opportunities, and inheritance matters. It also includes evidence of offshore accounts where Richard has been hiding company assets. I stared at the small device, hardly daring to believe this turn of events. "Why are you helping me?" "Because it's the right thing to do," she said simply. "And because you remind me of your grandfather, principled, determined, unwilling to be bullied. The Wilson spirit has nothing to do with DNA." With Eleanor's evidence in hand, Daniel filed a comprehensive lawsuit the following week. The complaint alleged fraud, forgery, breach of fiduciary duty, and discriminatory practices, seeking not just my rightful inheritance but punitive damages for the reputational harm I had suffered. The family's response was swift and aggressive. They hired Blackwell and Stone, a high-powered law firm from the city, who immediately filed motions to dismiss on technical grounds. Their public statement portrayed me as a disgruntled adoptee with psychological issues stemming from abandonment trauma, now lashing out at the family who had generously provided for me. Judge Caldwell scheduled the initial hearing for early February. Despite Daniel's concerns about Caldwell's connections to my family, we had no grounds for requesting a different judge without evidence of explicit bias. "We'll just have to make our case so airtight that even a friendly judge can't dismiss it," Daniel said as we prepared our arguments. The night before the hearing, I returned to my hotel room to find the door slightly ajar. Heart-pounding, I called hotel security instead of entering. When they arrived, we discovered the room had been thoroughly searched, drawers, emptied mattress, flipped, even air vents unscrewed. They were looking for Eleanor's USB drive. I realized grateful that I had given the original to Daniel and kept only an encrypted copy in my email. The next morning, as we arrived at the courthouse, several protesters stood outside with signs claiming I was attacking a respected family and exploiting adoption for financial gain. Local news cameras captured the scene, further damaging my public image. Inside the courtroom was packed with Wilson family members, business associates, and curious townspeople drawn by the scandal. Michael sat directly behind his attorney, smirking confidently whenever our eyes met. Judge Caldwell entered and the proceedings began. The family's attorney, Victoria Blackwell, presented their motion to dismiss with smooth confidence. "Your Honor, this case represents nothing more than an adopted daughter's resentment at discovering the natural limits of family obligations," she argued. "The Wilson family provided Miss Miller with every advantage for 32 years out of pure generosity. That they now wish to focus their business legacy on blood descendants is neither illegal nor unethical." My heart sank at the words. Miss Miller, they had already reverted to my birth name, erasing decades of identity with a legal technicality. When Daniel rose to present our side, Judge Caldwell seemed barely interested, checking his watch repeatedly. Our carefully prepared evidence about the forged signature on my trust fund was met with skepticism. "Couldn't this simply be a misunderstanding about a family loan?" the judge suggested. "Families often handle financial matters informally. Your Honor, the document explicitly requires the account holder's signature for any transfer." "That signature was forged," Daniel insisted. "Allegedly forged," Judge Caldwell corrected. "We haven't established that yet." The pattern continued throughout the hearing. Every piece of evidence we presented was minimized or questioned, while the family's assertions were accepted at face value. When Daniel attempted to introduce Eleanor's historical documentation of discrimination, Judge Caldwell ruled it irrelevant to the current proceedings. By the time the hearing concluded, it was clear we faced an almost impossible battle in this venue. Judge Caldwell took the motions under advisement, but his tone suggested he was leaning heavily toward dismissal. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. "Rebecca, how does it feel to attack the family that raised you? Is this really about money, or is it about feeling rejected? Do you regret trying to take what belongs to the real Wilson heirs?" Daniel ushered me through the crowd without comment, but the damage was done. The narrative had been successfully framed as ungrateful adopted daughter versus generous family, with no mention of the forgery, fraud, or systematic discrimination. Back at Daniel's office, our team gathered to assess the situation. "We need to request a change of venue," Jessica argued. "Caldwell is clearly biased." "On what grounds?" Daniel countered. "We need evidence of explicit prejudice, not just unfavorable rulings." "What about the protesters?" I suggested. "They seemed awfully organized for a spontaneous demonstration." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "If we can prove the family orchestrated them to influence the proceedings, that might help. But we still need more. The evidence keeps disappearing, I said in frustration. Hotel break-in, hacked accounts, stolen documents. How do we fight when they control everything? Not everything. Eleanor spoke up from the corner where she had been quietly listening. They don't control the truth. And sooner or later, the truth finds its way out. Her words proved prophetic, though not in the way any of us expected. That evening, Judge Caldwell issued his ruling. Almost all of our claims were dismissed, with only the trust fund forgery matter remaining open, and that with significant restrictions on permissible evidence. It was a devastating blow, one that might have broken me completely just weeks earlier. But something had changed inside me. The more they fought to erase me, the more determined I became to assert my existence and my rights. "This isn't over," I told Daniel as we reviewed the ruling. "Not by a long shot." "What's your next move?" he asked, studying me with new respect. "I'm going to take a page from their playbook," I replied. "If they want to fight dirty, they're about to learn. I'm a fast learner." 2 days after the disastrous court hearing, I received another email from Eleanor's anonymous account. "Everything has ears. Meet at the lighthouse. Sunset. Critical information." The old lighthouse at the edge of town had been decommissioned decades ago and now served as a rarely visited historical site. It offered the privacy we needed without the risk of electronic surveillance. I arrived as the winter sun was sinking toward the horizon, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of orange and pink. Eleanor was already there this time, accompanied by a distinguished-looking man I recognized as Edward Barnes, the family's longtime accountant who had retired 3 years earlier. "Edward has been helping me gather information," Eleanor explained after introductions. "He became concerned about certain practices during his final years with the company." Edward nodded gravely. "I raised questions about some financial irregularities before my retirement. The response was to accelerate my departure and have me sign an extraordinarily restrictive non-disclosure agreement, which he has technically not violated," Eleanor added, "as he hasn't disclosed company information to outsiders. I am still a major shareholder, and you are legally a Wilson despite current attempts to erase that fact." Edward opened his briefcase. "What I'm about to share explains why they've become so desperate to exclude Rebecca from the family business." The documents revealed a shocking truth. Wilson Financial Advisors had been struggling for years with Richard and Michael, making increasingly risky investments to maintain the appearance of success. The sale to Hastings Capital wasn't just about excluding me from my inheritance, it was a desperate attempt to cash out before complete collapse. "The company is essentially insolvent," Edward explained. "They've been moving client funds to cover losses, which is why they needed your trust fund money so urgently. The Hastings deal is their only escape route. And they need unanimous family agreement to complete the sale," Eleanor continued. "Any legal challenge from a legitimate shareholder could derail everything and potentially trigger investigations into their financial practices. That's why they're fighting so hard," I realized. "It's not just about my inheritance, it's about saving themselves from potential criminal charges." "Precisely," Edward confirmed. "And there's more. I've identified several offshore accounts where Richard has been hiding assets for years, accounts that should be included in any family distribution but have been kept secret." Eleanor handed me a sealed envelope. "Access information for those accounts. Together with Edward's documentation, it should give you the leverage you need." "Why are you both helping me?" I asked, still somewhat wary despite the valuable information. "You're taking significant risks." Edward smiled sadly. "I've spent 40 years helping build Wilson Financial, watching your grandfather create something that helped people. I can't stand by while Richard and Michael destroy that legacy through greed and dishonesty." "And I made a promise to your grandfather before he died," Eleanor added softly. "To protect all his grandchildren equally, regardless of how they came to the family. I've failed at that for too long, allowing myself to be marginalized and intimidated. No more." Armed with this new evidence, I felt hope returning. But Eleanor warned me to be cautious. "They're monitoring your every move," she said. "Your phones, email, even your meetings with Daniel. That's how they've stayed ahead of your legal maneuvers." "What do you suggest?" I asked. "Use their assumptions against them," she advised, her eyes showing a strategic sharpness that reminded me why she had been my grandfather's trusted partner in business and life. "Let them think they've won. Make public overtures about dropping the case while we quietly build an airtight case with the proper authorities." Edward nodded in agreement. "Financial crimes like these fall under federal jurisdiction. Judge Caldwell has no authority there." For the next week, I followed Eleanor's guidance precisely. I issued a press statement expressing regret for the family conflict and suggesting I was considering withdrawal of my claims for the sake of peace. I made visible visits to a therapist, actually a friend of Jessica's, to support the narrative that I was processing my emotional issues around adoption. Meanwhile, Daniel quietly compiled our evidence for submission to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Edward's detailed knowledge of the company's operations proved invaluable, as did Eleanor's historical records showing the pattern of discrimination against adopted family members. Eleanor coached me on the Wilson family's weaknesses and blind spots, particularly their tendency to underestimate women. Richard always dismissed my business acumen, she explained. He sees me as just the founder's widow, despite the fact that I helped build the company alongside your grandfather for 20 years. This insight helped explain why they had allowed Eleanor to maintain access to certain records. They simply didn't consider her a threat. Their mistake would prove costly. Our most valuable strategy session occurred during a weekend retreat at Eleanor's lake house, a property unknown to Richard and Michael since it was purchased after the family rift began. There, Eleanor, Edward, Daniel, Jessica, and I mapped out our comprehensive counterattack. The key is timing, Daniel emphasized. We need all our moves to happen simultaneously so they can't adapt and recover. And we need absolute secrecy until then, Edward added. One leak could derail everything. As we finalized our plans, Eleanor took me aside to the lakeside dock. The spring thaw had begun, and patches of dark water were visible through the melting ice. I want you to know something, she said, her voice uncharacteristically emotional. Your grandfather would be immensely proud of you. For fighting over money, I asked, skeptically. For refusing to let others define your worth, she corrected. For standing up for what's right, even when it would be easier to walk away. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Inside was a vintage emerald ring I recognized from old family photos. This was your grandfather's mother's ring, Eleanor explained. He always intended for you to have it on your 33rd birthday, said the green matched your eyes. I stared at the heirloom, tears blurring my vision. They told me all the family jewelry went to Michael's wife for future generations. Another lie, Eleanor said, gently placing the ring in my palm. You are a Wilson, Rebecca. Not because of paperwork or biology, but because you embody the values your grandfather held: dear integrity, perseverance, and moral courage. As she clasped the ring around my finger, I felt a profound shift within myself. For months I had been fighting to reclaim my place in a family that didn't want me. Now I understood I wasn't fighting for their acceptance anymore. I was fighting for justice and for the true meaning of family that they had corrupted. I won't let them win, I promised Eleanor and myself. Her eyes, so like my grandfather's, crinkled with determination. We won't let them win, she corrected. Tomorrow we show them what real Wilsons are made of. The plan began with a seemingly innocuous email: financial records from Wilson Financial accidentally leaked to several key business partners. The accident was carefully orchestrated by Edward, who still maintained relationships with many of the firm's major clients. The records showed concerning discrepancies that raised immediate red flags about the company's stability. Within hours, Michael was fielding panicked calls from investors and clients demanding explanations. The company's stock, which had been stable in anticipation of the Hastings acquisition, began to slide. Phase 2 involved a comprehensive file of documentation being delivered anonymously to the IRS and the Securities and Exchange Commission. Edward's meticulous records detailed years of questionable financial practices, including the misappropriation of my trust fund. The federal authorities moved with surprising speed, perhaps, because of the high-profile nature of the company. IRS agents are at the office, Sarah texted me just after lunch. Michael looks like he's going to be sick. Meanwhile, Daniel submitted our expanded legal filing to the federal court, completely bypassing Judge Caldwell and the local judiciary. The filing included Edward's affidavit, Eleanor's historical evidence, and the offshore account information, a comprehensive case that would be difficult for even the most biased judge to dismiss. By mid-afternoon, the business news networks had picked up the story, Wilson Financial under investigation for alleged fraud. Michael attempted damage control with a hastily arranged press conference, but his obvious nervousness only fueled speculation. They've reached out to negotiate, Daniel reported, holding up his phone with a message from Victoria Blackwell. They want to meet immediately. No, I said firmly. Let them sweat. For the first time in months, I was calling the shots. The power dynamic had shifted so dramatically that Richard and Patricia attempted to visit my hotel that evening, only to be turned away by the staff at my instruction. The following morning brought news that Hastings Capital had withdrawn their acquisition offer, citing previously undisclosed liabilities. Wilson Financial's stock plummeted further, and rumors circulated about potential bankruptcy. By noon, Victoria Blackwell was practically begging for a meeting. "My clients are prepared to make significant concessions," she told Daniel over the phone with me, listening on speaker. "Miss Wilson will consider discussions after her full shareholder rights are restored and the false statements about her are publicly retracted," Daniel replied calmly. "That's not possible," Victoria insisted. "The public narrative is established." "Then I'm afraid there's nothing to discuss," I interjected. "I'm quite comfortable letting the federal investigation run its course." The mention of the federal investigation prompted a noticeable change in Victoria's tone. "Perhaps we can find a middle ground. What specifically would Miss Wilson require in terms of a retraction?" We outlined our terms: a public statement, acknowledging the forgery, the discrimination, and affirming my legitimate status as a Wilson family member and company shareholder. Additionally, full restoration of my trust fund with interest and my rightful percentage of the company value protected in any future sale. "My clients will never admit to forgery," Victoria warned. "The liability implications are too severe." "Then we have nothing further to discuss," I replied, signaling Daniel to end the call. 30 minutes later, Victoria called back. "They'll do it," she said, sounding resigned. "But they want a private meeting first. Family only." After consulting with Eleanor and Daniel, I agreed to meet at Eleanor's home neutral territory that offered both privacy and security. Daniel insisted on preparing a recording device just in case, which I concealed in my blazer pocket. Richard, Patricia, and Michael arrived looking like shadows of themselves. The strain of the past week was evident in their haggard appearances and nervous mannerisms. "You've made your point, Rebecca," Richard began once we were seated in Eleanor's formal living room. "Very effectively, I might add." "This isn't about making a point," I replied evenly. "It's about justice." Justice, Michael scoffed. "You've potentially destroyed a 3-generation family business out of spite." "I didn't destroy anything. Your own actions did that." Patricia, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. "We never meant for things to go this far. It just escalated. Escalated from what exactly I pressed. From deciding I wasn't really family, from stealing my trust fund, from trying to erase me from the family history. We were trying to protect the family legacy," Richard insisted. "By committing fraud," Eleanor interjected sharply. "By betraying the very values Thomas built this family on." Richard had the decency to look ashamed at his late father's name. "We made mistakes," he admitted reluctantly. "Serious ones. Criminal ones," I corrected. "Ones that have consequences." The negotiation that followed was tense but productive. By evening, we had crafted an agreement that restored my financial rights, acknowledged the wrongdoing, though in carefully worded terms to minimize criminal exposure, and established a new governance structure for what remained of Wilson. Financial. One more thing, I added as Victoria prepared to formalize the agreement. "I want the company to establish a scholarship fund for adopted children named after Grandfather Wilson." Richard looked ready to object, but Eleanor cut in. "Thomas would have loved that idea. It's non-negotiable." With the core agreement established, our legal teams worked through the night to finalize the details. By morning, press releases were drafted, financial transfers initiated, and formal documents prepared for signing. The Wilson family's public statement acknowledged regrettable errors in judgment regarding Rebecca Wilson's rightful place in the family business, and affirmed her status as a full and equal member of the Wilson family with all attendant rights and privileges. News outlets that had previously portrayed me as a disgruntled adoptee now reported on the amicable resolution of the unfortunate family misunderstanding. Financial publications focused on the company's restructuring plans, with several noting my appointment to the board of directors as part of the settlement. As public opinion shifted, clients and friends who had distanced themselves began reaching out again. Some apologized for believing the worst. Others pretended they had supported me all along. I accepted these overtures graciously, but with a new wariness. The ordeal had taught me valuable lessons about the conditional nature of certain relationships. The most satisfying moment came when Judge Caldwell was forced to dismiss the remaining legal actions due to the settlement, his expression sour as Daniel outlined the federal interest in the case that had developed. His connection to the Wilson family had not protected him from the embarrassment of having his obvious bias essentially overruled. As I left the courthouse for the final time, reporters asked how it felt to be vindicated. This was never about winning or losing, I told them truthfully. It was about standing up for the principle that family is defined by love and commitment, not by blood or convenience. In the weeks that followed, I found myself in the unexpected position of helping salvage what remained of Wilson Financial. With Richard facing potential regulatory sanctions and Michael's reputation in tatters, Eleanor and I became the public faces of the company's rehabilitation efforts. We're building something better, I explained to nervous employees during a company-wide meeting. A business that honors its legacy while embracing a more inclusive definition of family and community. The road ahead would be challenging, regaining client trust, navigating continued regulatory scrutiny, rebuilding the corporate culture. But for the first time in months, I faced the future with confidence rather than dread. When a junior employee nervously asked about rumors of further layoffs, I thought carefully before answering. This company was built on relationships and trust, I said, echoing my grandfather's business philosophy. We're not looking to cut people out, we're looking to bring people together. The irony wasn't lost on anyone familiar with the recent family drama, but the message resonated with the anxious staff. As I concluded the meeting, I caught Eleanor smiling proudly from the back of the room. You sounded just like him, she told me later. Thomas would have been so proud, and for the first time since this ordeal began, I truly believed her. 1 year after Michael's fateful New Year's greeting, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my earrings, preparing for a very different holiday celebration. The woman looking back at me was recognizable but changed, more confident, less eager to please, with eyes that had seen betrayal but refused to become bitter. The past 12 months had been a journey through pain, anger, and ultimately healing. The legal battle had concluded with a comprehensive settlement that restored my financial rights and acknowledged the wrongs done to me. More importantly, it had given me clarity about what truly mattered. The doorbell rang, and I welcomed Jessica and Daniel, now dating after bonding during our legal crusade. Thomas and his husband Mark arrived next, followed by several others who had stood by me during the darkest times. Eleanor made a grand entrance, last elegant, as always, despite her advancing years. A lovely gathering, she approved, surveying my apartment decorated for the occasion. Much better than stuffy Wilson traditions. This was my new tradition, a chosen family celebration built on genuine connections rather than obligation or shared DNA. We had dubbed it Family of Choice Day, deliberately scheduled for New Year's Eve to reclaim a date that had once symbolized rejection. As dinner progressed, conversation flowed easily among this diverse group, united by their loyalty and integrity. I found myself watching them with a sense of wonder. How strange that losing my birth family had ultimately led to finding a truer family connection. A toast, Eleanor announced, raising her glass. To Rebecca, who taught us all what family really means. And to new beginnings, I added, thinking of the Adoption Advocacy Foundation I had established using part of my settlement. The organization provided legal support to adoptees facing discrimination, already helping dozens of families navigate complex legal and emotional terrain. Any word from Richard and Patricia? Jessica asked quietly as we moved to the living room for dessert. A Christmas card, I replied. Formal, polite, distant. The rift with my parents remained, though in a different form. After the settlement and public apology, we had established a carefully civil relationship focused primarily on company matters. They had acknowledged the wrong they had done, but true reconciliation would take more time if it happened at all. Michael had moved across the country, unable to face the community after the scandal. According to Eleanor, he was working for a small tech firm, starting over with a humility he had never before demonstrated. Part of me hoped he would find his way to genuine growth and perspective. Do you miss them? Thomas asked, understanding the complexity of emotions only another adoptee could fully grasp. I miss who I thought they were, I answered honestly. The parents I believed loved me unconditionally for 32 years. The grief is real, he acknowledged. Mourning the family you thought you had. That was exactly it, grief. I had moved through the classic stages over the past year: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally a kind of acceptance. Not acceptance that their treatment was okay, but acceptance that I couldn't change what had happened or who they had revealed themselves to be. The healing process had been anything but linear. There were days I found myself crying over old family photos, and others when rage would suddenly overtake me at the memory of Michael's cruel greeting. Therapy had been essential, helping me understand that these reactions were normal responses to profound betrayal. The hardest part, I told my guests as we settled in the living room with coffee and dessert, was reconstructing my sense of identity. If I wasn't Rebecca Wilson as I had understood myself to be for my entire life, then who was I? And who did you discover you are? Daniel asked. I smiled, appreciating the thoughtful question. Someone stronger than I knew. Someone who values authenticity over appearance, substance over status. Someone who defines family by actions rather than ancestry. Working with Wilson Financial had given me unexpected purpose. With Eleanor's mentorship, I had implemented policies ensuring equal treatment for all employees, regardless of background. The company that had nearly collapsed under the weight of deceit was slowly rebuilding with a foundation of integrity. The scholarship program has its first recipients, I announced, sharing the news I had been saving. 5 adopted students will receive full college funding next fall. Eleanor beamed with pride. Thomas would have loved that. Using the Wilson resources to create opportunity rather than exclusion. As midnight approached, we gathered on my balcony to watch the city's fireworks display. The air was crisp with winter cold, but the sky was clear and star-filled. Any resolutions for the new year? Jessica asked as we waited for the countdown. I considered the question seriously. To keep building what matters. To remember that family isn't something you're born into, it's something you create through love, trust, and showing up for each other. When the fireworks exploded across the sky at midnight, I felt the emerald ring on my finger, my grandfather's legacy, and knew that, despite everything, I had found my way to a more authentic understanding of family than I had ever had before. Later, after my guests had departed and I was alone in the quiet of my apartment, I opened the small wooden box where I kept significant mementos. Inside was a handwritten letter Eleanor had given me months earlier, a letter my grandfather had written for me before his death to be delivered, when I was ready to understand the true meaning of the Wilson legacy. I had read it countless times, but tonight its message resonated with particular clarity. My dearest Rebecca, blood makes relatives, but love makes family. Never let anyone tell you that you are less than a full Wilson. In fact, you may be the most Wilson of all, because you were chosen deliberately with full awareness of the blessing you would bring to our lives. The wealth and business that bear our name are only tools. What matters is how we use them to create connection, opportunity, and meaning. Always remember that your worth has nothing to do with your origin, and everything to do with your choices. With enduring love, your grandfather. These words had become my foundation, not the Wilson name or money, but the values my grandfather had tried to instill. Though the journey had been painful, I had ultimately found my way to the true inheritance he had intended for me. As I prepared for bed, I caught sight of myself in the mirror once more. The pain wasn't gone entirely, perhaps it never would be completely, but it had transformed into something useful, even powerful. My experience had become a catalyst for helping others, for building something meaningful from the ruins of what was lost. I was Rebecca Wilson, not because of adoption papers or legal settlements, but because I had fought for and earned the right to define myself on my own terms. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, for the first time in a long time, I felt completely at peace with who I was and the path I had chosen. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey from betrayal to healing. I'd love to know if you've ever had to redefine what family means to you. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength through life's toughest challenges. Share this with someone who might need to hear that family is about love, not blood. Until next time, remember that you have the power to create the family you deserve.